Welcome back to Outside Views, and bro, we need to talk. And I'm glad you're here because today I want to talk about something that makes my blood boil. It's the sheer frustrating self-sabotage at the heart of the UK's current economic policy. The subject is the country's fiscal framework, which sounds dull, I know, but trust me, it's anything but. It's supposed to be the cornerstone of macroeconomic success, the thing that anchors expectations, lowers borrowing costs, and supports long-term growth. Instead, what we are witnessing here is an absolute failure. A fiscal framework that acts not as a cornerstone, but as a millstone around the neck of the British economy. It's amplifying uncertainty, inhibiting growth, and frankly, it feels like nothing so much as a Brexit tribute act. We've seen this movie before, and I don't like the ending though. A good framework is supposed to combine rules and discretion, what economists call constrained discretion. The rules part is for credibility, to show the bond markets the government is serious about sustainability. And the discretion part is for flexibility, allowing the government to act as a shock absorber to counter-cyclically respond to project and protect jobs and growth when the worst things happen. Think of the global financial crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic, where G7 countries, including the UK, deployed fiscal support equivalent to 5 to 10% of GDP in the former and 15 to 20% in the latter. And that flexibility was essential. But what the UK has built now is an ironclad set of rules that completely fails the flexibility test. Historically, ironclad rules have been the very rock upon which policy has founded. It was the inflexible nature of past mandates, like the gold standard, that forced the UK to abandon them when they started cratering the economy instead of cushioning it. And I believe the same fate now awaits this current fiscal framework. The real issue is the impossible tightrope the government has chosen to walk. Fiscal rules, like inflation targets, are set based on future projections, and those projections are inherently surrounded by massive uncertainty. The Office for Budget Responsibility makes it clear that this uncertainty can amount to several percentage points of GDP over a 5-year horizon. And this is the key detail that tells you how ridiculous the current situation is. The government's built-in fiscal headroom, the slack or margin for error to meet its targets, is currently standing at around a minuscule 0.3% of GDP. To put that into perspective, that tiny margin is completely dwarfed by the massive uncertainty in the OBR's own forecasts. A change of just 0.1% in the trend and their productivity forecast, it's like a macroeconomic rounding error essentially, is enough to wipe out the government's entire fiscal headroom. It means the government is perpetually on the brink of breaching its own rules based on the slightest shift in an uncertain projection. And that's just an invitation for disaster. This structural fragility has led to an utterly toxic year-long cycle of speculation and uncertainty. And the ink is barely dry on one budget, supposedly fixing a previous financial black hole, before the fevered speculation begins again about the next black hole and the inevitable tax rises or spending cuts needed to fill it. The constant back and forth about whether the government will meet its rules or what draconian measures they will pull out next is intensely damaging to growth. And here's where the Tribute Act truly begins. The most authoritative measure of this anxiety is the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index, as devised by economists Baker, Bloom and Davis. For the UK, this index spiked sharply after the last major budget and peaked in early 2025 at a level just below the peak seen during the Brexit referendum in 2016. It has remained around double its pre-crisis average, a spike that, while part of a global phenomenon, is notably larger in the UK than elsewhere. The path, the peak, the feeling of this policy uncertainty over the past year eerily mimics the patterns of the Brexit aftermath. That previous wave of uncertainty is estimated to have knocked 1.5 to 2.5% off UK GDP and 3 to 6% of business investment in the years that followed. And we are seeing the direct effects of this new wave already in subdued business and consumer sentiment and higher precautionary saving. This fiscal framework is simply replaying the policy paralysis of 2016 and 2017, only this time the self-inflicted wound is not a referendum result, but a ridiculously tight fiscal rule combined with tiny headroom. And the damage doesn't stop with uncertainty. The current situation is actively forcing the government to make anti-growth decisions. Right now, the economy is stalled and desperately needs a loosening of the fiscal purse strings. It needs support, investment, and a sense of stable direction. But because of this flawed framework, a fiscal gap of around £30 billion has to be filled, either through lower spending or higher taxes, and that means the government is being forced into a 1% of GDP fiscal tightening. A stalled economy needs that kind of tightening like it needs a hole in the head. Just like the broken, rigid policy frameworks of the past, this one demands tightening at the precise moment the economy requires loosening. The only way to reduce the destabilizing uncertainty, to build a plausible extra cushion of, let's say, 1% of GDP in headroom, is, under the current rules, to introduce an equivalent amount of fiscal tightening. And this is where the policy becomes truly perverse, actively forcing the government to compound the fiscal felony. The rules invites everyone to pick their poison, growth-wise. They are an inhibitor and not an enabler, an iceberg and not an anchor, a shock transmitter, not an absorber. This is a disastrously designed system. And let me be clear, I know the UK's fiscal position is fragile, and I know that stabilizing the public finances, yes, that requires radical change. And it demands hard choices, especially tackling the big beasts of health and welfare spending. And it also needs root and branch reform of the tax code, which is famously one of the most complex in the world. But the current fiscal framework actively discourages real reform. It forces a focus on short-term cosmetic tinkering. The hasty tax hike here, the last-minute spending cut there, all done twice a year to meet a ludicrously thin margin on a single uncertain forecast. And this tinkering is inimical to the long-term structural growth-enhancing reforms that the UK so desperately needs to solve its underlying debt problems. And my view is that this is not just bad policy, it's the philosophical and political consequence of the country's recent direction. A political class so scarred by the chaos of the past decade that they cling to brittle, simplistic rules that generate chaos of their own. Britain needs genuine foundational reform to replace this fragile and self-defeating structure. Without fundamentally reforming this fiscal framework in the upcoming budget, I believe the prospects for sustainable UK growth and the credibility of the government itself are unlikely to improve. They will simply continue to be buffeted by the kind of policy uncertainty that has already cost the economy so much. And that truly is the sad, destructive final act of this whole mess. So thank you for joining me on Outside Views again, and I'm really looking forward to your opinion on this video. And if you want to see another one, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.